Hi, folks. This is Don Meissner with Linda, who is always by my side with everything I do about fishing. And we're here with the North Country Fishing Report. And Linda, you put together 3 ideas that you wanted us to include this week for fishing. So go ahead, you shoot.
Okay. The first one is it's we're coming up to spring, and so my question is, what do anglers do this time of year?
Coming up, what do anglers do? Well, they hope that they can go fishing. And that brings up a great point. Something that I was planning on talking about is that I want people to understand that spring may be the best fishing of the whole year. I really believe that. It certainly is for me. And the reason for that is most of the species are in their spawn or pre-spawn phase. And what that means is they're going to be in shallow water areas that are more easy for most of us to get to fish by. And so it really gives us a chance, I think, to catch a trophy, because a lot of these fish that are spawning are the biggest of each species. That's why we try to protect these fish during the time of spawn, because we don't want to destroy the genetics and the sort of the line of development that species had. You know, the biggest fish of any species have probably lived the longest and have withstood the most challenges, and so they've got the strongest genetics. So this is an important time, but it's a time when we can catch them and hopefully return them back to the water after we've taken our picture or whatever we do. But, you know, this is a wonderful time to go fishing. You know, I think of all the great fishing that I've had in the spring. It's when I've caught my biggest northern pike. Unfortunately, it's a time when we would probably have the best chance of catching a huge smallmouth or largemouth bass, because they're really susceptible at this time of the year, and that's why the season isn't open yet where you can legally fish for them. But if you're fishing for any of the fish in our areas, those bass are going to be with them in the same waters, and you're going to catch bass inadvertently if that's the case. And for a lot of people, it's intentional that they fish at this time for bass, because they know that they're going to catch the biggest ones. And I'm not encouraging that, because that would be remiss on my part doing this show. But Linda, does that bring up any other questions?
Well, in fact, I was thinking, doesn't spring mean trout? Trout season?
Yeah, that was always the big thing in my life when I was a kid, was the opening of trout season, April 1st. But, you know, one of the things that any article will tell you is when season first opens, that water is going to be the coldest, the highest, and it's the most turbulent. And those fish are not going to be real active till the water starts warming a bit. And as the water starts warming, you're going to start getting the birth of a lot of insect life or underwater terrestrials that these fish feed upon. So the fishing's going to become better as the season progresses. But trout season is always, I remember as a kid, people would be down along the river and I wouldn't sleep at night, and I was always able to have my parents allow me to go down at 4 a.m, and there'd be bonfires out along the bank, and that was how they began the trout season. It was almost like Christmas to a kid like me.
See, that sounds like great fun.
Trout fishing is great fun, and we've got beautiful waters in all of our areas for trout fishing. And as we've talked about before, and you and I, Linda, have spent a lot of time with Aaron Hardy,
Yes.
who is now a guide for our area for trout. And his whole goal is to be able to teach people about it. They can't become a good trout fisherman if they don't understand the species and what that species feeds upon, where they live, and all these things. This is part of what Aaron wants to teach people.
And it fascinates me that at any given time of the day, you might use a different lure, whether it's something that you're, like something with a marabou jig. I don't know what those are. I just remember
Let's
seeing
not confuse
some of them.
people with trout fishing, because, but you're right, at any particular time of the day, their activity can change depending on sunlight and the water temperature increasing a little bit. Just a little bit can trigger
Different
action.
hatches.
Yes.
Well, I
Yes.
did learn something.
Well, marabou jigs is not what people usually think about for fishing for trout, but I got to tell you, in fishing for ponds in the Adirondacks and all over the country that I fish for trout, The one thing that really has always worked good for us at the very beginning of season is little flies that are called woolly buggers, which are very similar to what a marabou jig would look like, just a little black or brown creature going through the water.
They look furry.
And fish very slowly and moving along the shoreline. This has been my favorite way to catch trout in the spring. But in the streams, we fishermen want to look for areas that the water slows down, little back eddies and places like that where the trout can congregate, and they won't be as harshly treated by the water as they would in current areas. They don't want to be fighting the current when it's that cold and when they're basically weaker.
That's fascinating. Again, you'd have to judge and determine the water.
Yes.
So you have to really know what you're doing.
But one of the things for people to realize is the further south you go from the North Country, I'm talking about just a few miles, can make a difference of what the general conditions are. And as you go south, you'll see that the water frees itself of ice sooner, and there's nicer areas where you can get out in the spring and really try to catch fish. You know, as wonderful as we have the trout fishing in the far reaches of the North Country, you know, it really starts a little bit later. And so when April 1st rolls around, my recommendations are be patient. You know, I don't know if I'm going to be out there the first day. I would as a kid. I would be out there wading through a foot of snow to get along the bank and to be able to throw my worm or my salted minnow out there and let it work slowly down through this pool and wait for the trout to find it. And that's kind of a different kind of fishing. When you fish those little pools like that, and you got to be patient, and it's different than once the season gets really going, when you're finding the trout and you're presenting them with the bait, other than waiting for the trout to find the bait, which is what happens in the early spring.
How interesting.
I hope so. Until next time, folks, this is Don and Linda with the North Country Fishing Report.